Okay, guys, good morning. Hello, wake and rise and shine. How are you doing? Yeah, so just got about 5 minutes, then we'll get our class started. If you all are doing well, I'm, as usual, I guess for now, back at Chapman and Argyrios Forum. And yeah, like I say, we got about 4 minutes to start class, but I hope you've been having a good week. And feel free to say hi or anything else anytime. I know there's just a couple of us for now. Hi, Alex. Good morning. Good to see you. Guess it's just us for now, but that's all right. I guess tomorrow I'm going in for the second dose of the whole Pfizer vaccine, so then that'll be all over with. That'll be nice. Other than that, nothing too special to report on my side. Just a lot of teaching, grading assignments, doing emails. Hi, Ryan. Good to see you too. Oh, nice. So was it Pfizer, Moderna? I wonder. Maybe you'll be able to tell me how you felt after that. I know some friends that have also had their second dose this week, and I haven't heard anyone reporting like very significant side effects, maybe just a little soreness and some fatigue. Yeah, so has anyone come to class? Not in this hour, but I have 2 classes at Chapman this semester, and in my 10 to 10:50 hour, I have had 3 students that have been coming. So yeah. Oh, you get your second dose on Tuesday. Sorry, Ryan. I thought you said you got. I thought it was past tense. Not to worry. Yeah, I got my first dose back in 3 weeks ago, and that didn't cause any issues for me at all. Good morning, Elif and Grant and everyone else. Eloise, good to see you guys. Yeah, so far we haven't had any in-person attendance in this class. Like I've said, though, it's fair game if anybody does want to do that. It's a big classroom and there's a lot of space. But I don't want anyone to like complicate their schedule or plans. It's totally fine for me. Had nobody opted to prefer the in-person option, I would have happily just remained at, my apartment with my cats. But I don't mind, I guess, taking a little drive, especially now that I have the vaccine going. It doesn't really bother me too much. Hi, Stephen, Abi, Jianyan, and all the rest here. Always nice to see you guys, and we'll be getting started in just a bit. Hey, Ryan. Cool. Hey, Dimitri, Kylie, Nicole, Brian. Appreciate you guys' continued focus and hard work. So yeah, let me just go ahead and get things started. It's pretty much 9 a.m. Welcome back. And notice that I sent off yesterday afternoon, I think sometime around 2 p.m., the notification that the first essays, that's been a while, but the midterm exam has now been graded too. So I'm in the process of responding to student grade requests. If you're curious about the grade on that or anything overall, just feel free to email me and I'll be certain to respond to you within like 48 hours of whenever you sent the message. Yesterday, I couldn't get back into my emails after I sent it. I had some errands to run. This morning, I'm teaching, but once I get back home and conduct the office hours, key point, you can't forget that. I'll send off the office hour link as soon as this class period is over. And as I was mentioning in the announcement yesterday, I have to make a slight edit to the office hour schedule. It would have been 11 to 12 as it had been before, but now that I'm commuting, back and forth, I need a little time to get back to my apartment to start the Zoom session for the office hour. So it just moves to 11:30 to 12:30, the 30 minutes later into the day. So I'll send off that Zoom link. If anyone did want to go to their to the office hours, then you'll be able to use the link to check it out from 11:30 to 12:30. And so, yeah, again, my method of returning scores is through individual request and email. So anybody feel free to email me if you have already, not to worry. I'll be right with you either later today or latest tomorrow morning. And then we'll be good to go. And we'll continue through the semester as we, broach the rest of the topics and finish off the ones that we're doing right now. Okay, guys. So as usual, feel free anytime to ask any questions. If you have anything that's on your mind or that you're not sure about, just let me know, whether it's about the course material, the schedule, any of the assignments, or anything else. Okay, guys. So, and like, as you know, leave a comment at some point just to keep the track record of attendance going. Okay, then. So let's just kind of pick up where we left off in terms of the material, guys. As you may know now, this week we started on a new topic in the class, which is epistemology. And epistemology is the theoretical study of human knowledge. What is knowledge? What does it take to obtain it? What are the criteria for having it? What's the difference between really having knowledge and just guessing and happening to be correct? So this discussion took us back into the world of ancient Greece as we learned about some of the ideas of Socrates and Plato on the question of knowledge. I talked to you about the history of those figures, and that basically eventually led us to the Platonic account of knowledge, somewhat just the Socratic or Platonic account. It's always a bit of a question, how much is due to Socrates, how much is due to Plato? But anyway, in the dialogue, we have Socrates talking with this man named Meno, who's a Greek general. I'm just summarizing that very briefly for now. And what happens is Socrates asks Meno, well, what if someone knew how to get to this city called Larissa, and they've been there many times? Couldn't they lead someone there based on their knowledge? And Meno says, sure, yes, of course. And then he changes the question and asks, what if someone didn't really know how to go there because they've never done it before, but they do have a correct opinion as to what the way is? Like, for example, as I tried to explain, suppose that someone didn't really have knowledge by heart of how to get there because they never did it, but they were like relying on, say, an accurate map or an accurate GPS, Google Maps type system. Wouldn't that also work to lead people to the destination, even if they didn't have knowledge, just a correct opinion? And by the way, correct opinion in our terminology is just a true belief, but that does not have justification. So Meno agrees again, yeah, a true belief without justification, a correct opinion, would do just as well as at leading people correctly to the city of Larissa. So then he asks, well, then why would people prefer to have knowledge as opposed to a correct opinion? Are they just the same value? Correct opinions just as valuable as knowledge? And Meno says, well, to some extent, but it's better to have knowledge because the one who has knowledge will always make it there, whereas the one with a correct opinion will only make it there sometimes. And Socrates kind of presses him on the point, saying, well, what's the difference, though? If you have the correct opinion, won't it get you there as long as it's correct? So finally, Socrates says, I'll tell you what I think is the real answer to why knowledge is more valued than a correct opinion. So he references this myth, the statues of Daedalus. Can anybody in this chat just tell me a thing or two about these famous Daedalus sculptures and what the myth was? Just let's see if we can identify that little piece of info, and then we can continue with this review for the moment. Daedalus statues. Socrates brings them up. He's saying this to Meno. Why does he say it? What's this, myth or whatever? What's this legend of the statues? So let's just get it in the chat one time, and I'll just wait for you to give me a quick response on that. Okay, so Stephen, you tell me this. The statues were so realistic that they were rumored to run away if they were not properly tied down by ropes. That's right. Same to you, Connor. Well, no, not the same, Connor. Actually, it's a little off. You say they tried to fly but got too confident. No, 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 no. Maybe you were thinking about the myth of Icarus. Icarus flew too close to the sun and it burned his wings that were made of wax, causing him to plunge to the surface. That's another Greek myth, sure, but it's not the one that we're referring to. But not to worry, that's an interesting example too. You know, sometimes when I'm running too much and I'm like really trying to press my body and then I end up getting injured, I feel like I'm Icarus. You know, I tried too hard and then I got hurt. Now I have to take a step back. But anyway, no worries. Let's go with what you said, Stephen, because that's what I was mentioning. These statues Daedalus made, they're very realistic, and the reputation then was that you better tie them down by ropes, because if you didn't do that, then they might just get up and run away when you're not looking because they're that realistic. Now, what's the point of his metaphor? He says the ropes are to the statues as what is to what? What do the ropes stand for symbolically in Socrates' explanation here? He says, if you think about it, the ropes add a little bit of value to the statues because they won't let them leave. It's great to have the statue with or without the ropes, but wouldn't you rather have the ropes because then it's not going to go away? What's this metaphor trying to explain about knowledge? He says there's something that's parallel to the concept of these ropes, and what is it? Because it's not just a fun story about statues that's got no point. There's a whole, you know, lesson that he's teaching us about knowledge here. So what do the ropes stand for? Oh, you can't forget so fast. I mean, it's just been a few days. What do the ropes stand for? Justification. Correct, Stephen. But are you the only one that knows this? Come on, everybody. Okay, so let's go to this. Knowledge is defined as a what? What is the three-point definition of knowledge? That's also going to be relevant to today's lecture, so it'll help us to get that on the table. They say that knowledge is a state of having what? Three things. Let me know what each three pieces are. Okay, good, Connor. JTB, justified true belief. You could say correct. That's a synonym for true. Fair enough, Claire. But a lot of times they just go with the letter T for true. But no problem, same thing. So that's right. Justified true belief. Belief, meaning you think something is true. Truth, meaning that what you think is true is actually a fact in reality, not just your head, but it's real. And then justification means having good evidence or reasons. Now, these ropes in the Daedalus metaphor are supposed to stand for the role that justification plays in knowledge. Without justification, say you just have the other two parts, truth and belief, correct opinion. If that's all that you have, then you lack evidence or reasons to ground your belief. And if you don't have those evidence or reasons, then what might happen? You might forget the information, or you might change your mind about it. In the same way, these statues, they are saying, will get up and run away if you don't secure them down by the ropes. So the ropes lock down the statues, and the justification locks down and prevents true beliefs from escaping a person's mind. So that's why he thinks justification is all important to the definition of knowledge. It's what converts what would have just been a true opinion into a state of knowledge, and it keeps it there in your mind because it fastens it to your belief system with reasons. I would add this one last little point about that as we close that explanation and discussion. When we talk about justification in just everyday language, if we ever do, I mean, sometimes we do that, we even use linguistic metaphors that sort of recall to mind Socrates' example of these ropes. So when you have really good solid evidence for something, you say things like, well, my belief is really grounded in something. You know, it's grounded on evidence, grounded, like ropes ground the statue. Or you can say my belief is very well based. I have a great basis for the belief. And ropes, again, will base the statue into the ground. So basing, etc., kind of metaphors, grounding metaphors, they sort of give further credence to the way that Socrates uses ropes as an analogy to evidence and justification. Okay, so but then we started at the tail end of last meeting to start talking about the work of Edmund Gettier. So we learned that the Greeks thought that knowledge was justified true belief. But Edmund Gettier is an American philosopher of the 20th century, still alive. And he said, no, that's not actually quite correct. So let's return to the topic of his paper. This is the author for now, Edmund Gettier. And born in 1927, still alive, still going strong, Mr. Gettier is. And his paper, Is Justified True Belief Knowledge, from 1963. Is it? Question mark? 1963. Okay. So did I tell you guys about this guy, the fact that he only wrote one thing in his life, and it was this paper? I mean, the only thing he published, and it's just 2 pages long, and it's considered like a classic, almost like a revolutionary paper, even though it is that short. So it had a huge impact, but it's very brief. And he just dropped this paper on the world, showed us that our working understanding of knowledge is off, and then never published anything else after that. So it's kind of like an epic academic background to talk about. So let's get into his paper. Here's 2 things that he says to start. One of them I know we did talk about at the tail end, at the very end of last meeting. So he has these 2 preliminaries to get the paper started. Okay, so you see the title, author, and dates. I can erase that. Now let's get into the content of the paper. The first thing he says is this, 2 preliminary points to get the examples set up. Okay, number 1, it is possible to have a justified false belief. Okay, it is possible to have a justified false belief. Normally, when you have justified beliefs, that increases the likelihood that they'll be true, because justification evidence, it gives you proof. It gives you a basis to think something is true. But in at least some possible cases, we can have evidence that is misleading, and we can form a belief that was well justified but incorrect. If someone's trying to hide something from you, then the evidence may make it look like they didn't do something, but in fact they did. Or you can have a cover-up type scenario. You can have misinterpretation of evidence. You could have a conviction based on available evidence, but it was still the wrong verdict. So whatever the case may be, it's possible at least to have a justified false belief. Okay, hopefully that's clear. Justification can't guarantee that a belief is true, basically. It makes it likelier, but it's not like 100% in every case where you have justification, the belief based on it is true. Okay, now here's another preliminary, and this one's a little technical and it takes a moment to explain. So let's just be patient and really focus on this. The second preliminary point he makes is what's called the closure principle. So I think I have enough space over here to write it. I'm going to put it on this section of the board. Okay, so this is called the closure principle. This is an important logical principle and kind of like an axiom of logic and epistemology. So the closure principle says this: if some subject, some epistemic agent S, is justified in believing a proposition P, okay, so if S is justified in believing some statement, and we're just labeling that P with a variable to stand for generality, because it could be any number of different possible statements. So if S is justified in believing P, and P entails Q, okay, we'll get into what that means, but just bear with me. If S is justified in believing P and P entails Q, and S, the subject, the person, the epistemic agent, and S deduces Q from P. See if I can get around that glare. I'll just kind of write a little over there. Then, if all these other prior conditions are met, then in that case, S, the subject, is also justified in believing Q. Okay, so there's a few pieces here that we have to break down and make clear. And I know that at a first glance it may look a little bit, confusing or technical, but it's actually not that tough to understand once we just master a few definitions there. So let me read it one more time and then we'll go through it piece by piece. It says, suppose that S is justified in believing a statement P, and P entails Q, and furthermore, S deduces that statement Q from P. If all that happens, then in that case, S is also justified in believing Q. So the first thing I guess to say about this, to make it more clear, is to get a clear understanding and definition of the word entailment, what it is for two statements to have the relationship of entailment. In other words, what it is for a proposition to entail another one. Okay, so let's try and think about this and reason it out. I think it's a word that probably some of you have heard or at least have some type of prior familiarity with. So hopefully I can lean on that to get it clear for everybody. But suppose that I tell you that if A entails B, and A is just a statement and B is another statement or proposition. So if A entails B, then if A is true, B, what do you think? So suppose that A entails B, and just help me finish this definition. If A entails B, then in case A is true, what do you think has to be the case regarding B? So entailment is a logical relationship that holds between two related propositions. Suppose that A entails B. From this, it means that in case A is true, it's guaranteed with necessity that what about B? So when A entails B, the truth of A assures or guarantees what other thing? That B is true. Exactly, Grant. Correct. And same to you, Nicole. Perfect. So if A entails B, then if and when A is true, B must also be true. So I'm going to try and just get you to provide some easy enough examples, I hope, of what entailment is by means of some, propositions. So here's one proposition of fact, and I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm Dr. Vulich, and I was born in the decade of the 1980s, okay? So getting quite old already, but that's okay. I was born in the 80s. You heard me? So that's a statement. That's a proposition. Vulich was born in the 80s. Can you tell me a statement B? Let's call that A. Vulich was born in the 80s. What could be B, something that's entailed by that? So since I was born in the 80s, what's another statement that has to be true then? Just logically. If Vulich is born in the 80s is a fact, then here's another thing that has to be a fact because it is entailed by that first proposition. Let me know. Something that follows logically from the fact that I was born in the 80s. There's almost infinitely many things that you could choose, but I don't know. I would just like to see what you come up with here. Just something that has to be true. Since I was born in the 80s, it implies that I'm definitely older than 20. Okay, that's good. Yeah. That I remember 9/11. Well, sure. Yeah. Okay. So I would have been alive during 9/11 since it's today, 2021. So that's one thing that you can say is entailed. If I had been born in the 2000s, it wouldn't entail that I was alive during 9/11 because I would have been born perhaps after the date. That's one example. Now, Stephen, I like yours as well. Doesn't that follow? Yes. If I was born in the 80s, doesn't it have to be true that I'm older than 20? Of course, because just of math, right? There's no way that you can say, oh, I was born in the 80s, but I'm actually only 18 right now. This is mathematically, logically impossible. So entailment is just that relationship of logical consequence. So I don't know, if I'm born in the 80s and you're born in the 2000s, then that conjunction entails that I'm older than you, right? That has to be the case if the previous information is true. We think through logical entailment all the time. Love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I do remember the cartoon and the movies back in the 90s and even late 80s, to be honest. I did watch those shows. I don't know why. I was never a huge fan of the action type, cartoons. I always liked the funny, silly ones more. But yeah, it was cool. I liked Michelangelo the best. He was funny. Always wanted to eat pizza and stuff. A little less work ethic than the other three, if you know what I'm talking about. But okay, so good examples all around. How about this? I'm your professor. Do you think that entails that I graduated high school? Yes, because it's a minimum criteria for being employed here as a professor that you at least have a master's degree. So in no way could I be your professor but not have a high school degree. So there's all kinds of things that we can say are entailed by other things. Therefore, returning to the closure principle, here's all that it says. Suppose you're justified in believing one statement, call it P. And then you recognize that there's a logical consequence that follows from the first thing that you have justification for believing. All this is saying is that the justification you had originally transfers over to the second statement that you deduce from the first one. So like, for example, right now, do you believe you're justified in having the thought that Dr. Vulich was born in the 80s? I would say, just to help you, yes, you are justified in that. What's your evidence? You heard it from the man himself, me. So I told you that. So if anyone asks you, why do you think he was born in the 80s? You'd be able to say, well, my evidence is that he just simply told me himself. So anyway, that's justified. Now you do logic. And so you're thinking, well, he was born in the 80s. I know my math. So that entails that he must be older than even 30. And, you'd be a correct logical deduction if you did that. So the second statement is now also fully justified. The justification carries over because the first statement guarantees the truth of the second if it is true. So whatever evidence you have for the first one is just as adequate in serving as evidence for the second statement. Okay. When I was a grad student in philosophy, my advisor was Sven Bernecker, a really great professor, a very smart man. He had a funny example of this. I don't know, so I'll pass it on to you. I always thought it was odd, but it works. He says, suppose you're petting a dog, okay? And probably many or most of you have petted a dog or even have one. So let's just take the case. Or if you've never petted a dog, pretend. Imagine that hypothetically, what it would be like. Okay, so if you're petting a dog, let's suppose you would be justified in that moment in the belief that I am petting a dog. Okay, what would be your evidence? Well, the tactile sensation, the visual that you would be seeing. So it's solid perceptual evidence that you are, in fact, petting a dog. Now, notice that all dogs are mammals. Is that fair? They are. They're all mammals, every single one, because they give live birth. They're warm-blooded, just like us. We're other mammal species, but they are too. Okay, so all dogs are mammals. So when you pet the dog, you're justified in believing that. Suppose then you deduce, well, all dogs are mammals. So it follows, therefore, it entails that I am petting a mammal. Your evidence that you're petting a dog then would be just as much justification for the second statement. Okay, so that's the closure principle. I just had to lay that out for you because it's one important piece of the examples that are now going to follow. Okay, so one last thing, and then we'll get into Gettier's famous cases, the Gettier cases, the Gettier examples. Forests have been cleared to print paper that has been used to discuss the topics that Gettier raised in these two very interesting examples. So anyway, but one more thing. Before he launches into the cases that he gives us three different alternative statements of the classical definition of knowledge, the JTB definition. Now, I don't want anyone to be thrown off or confused when you look at that part of the paper, because it's not that he's saying there are three different definitions of knowledge. He's just saying that there are various ways that one could express the common definition of knowledge. So these are not three different definitions, they're three different wordings of the same definition. For example, in one part he says, sometimes they phrase it as, S knows that P, just in case, and then he lists these three conditions with little Arabic numerals. So one definition of knowledge statement that he provides is this. S, some subject, some epistemic agent, knows that P, just in case. So the letters IFF stand for if and only if, which is logically equivalent to just in case as a statement. So S knows that P, just in case, three things. P is true. That's the truth condition, T. S believes that P, that's the belief condition, B. And then the third criteria, S, the subject, is justified in believing that P. So that's the J condition, justification. So like that, there is essential statement of the classical definition of knowledge. But he says sometimes people phrase it just slightly differently. So just so you're aware of that, here's another possible wording of the same. S, so just walling that off from this definition. S knows that P, just in case, and we could state the conditions variously in this way. Just in case, sorry, I know I'm kind of like blocking it, but just in case, number one, S accepts P. Number two, S has adequate evidence for P. or, and I should say, conjunction. Number 3, and P is true. Okay, so looking at this statement of the concept that you see positioned here on the board, can you tell me how these 3 criteria match to the classical definition? So which of these 3 is the, let me go through them one by one. In number 1, where it says S accepts P, which of the 3 conditions of knowledge do you think that represents? Truth, belief, or justification? When S accepts P, that's synonymous with which one of the 3 conditions? To accept P is just another perhaps wordier way or different way of saying that the person what about P. So I'm just showing you that there's like, yeah, that's the belief condition. To accept the statement is to think it's true, which is to believe it. P is true, the 3rd criteria, is obviously the exact same wording, so we know that's the truth condition. Therefore, I mean, even by process of elimination, if it wasn't already obvious, S has adequate evidence for P is the justification requirement. Having adequate evidence, having good enough evidence to have a basis, that's justification. So he says, people all seem to basically agree on the classical definition of knowledge. Sometimes people word it differently, but the various different wordings all amount to the same thing. So then he says, now I've listed for you the classic definition of knowledge, and now I'm going to try and show you that it's off, that it's actually not a perfect definition, that there are counter examples to it. The basic program now is he's going to try and show us examples where someone does have a justified true belief, but even so, despite that, they still don't have knowledge. They still don't know the proposition that they have a justified true belief about. And if any such examples can be produced, again, examples where there is a justified true belief that is not equal to knowledge. So JTB equal sign strike through K, like it's not equal to knowledge. If there's even one example of that, then that shows that this is not a closed definition of knowledge because, if it was the right definition, then every single instance of justified true belief would be knowledge. If there are counterexamples to it, it shows us that the definition is incomplete and insufficient and that it cries out for supplementation from further criteria that are as yet unspecified. So let us then finally get to these famous Gettier cases, case 1 and 2. The first one is the one that everyone talks about the most. It's the most well-known and most well-discussed. So that's the one I'm going to focus on primarily, and if we can, we'll talk about number 2 as well. Okay, so Gettier case 1. And like I told you guys before, I am going to send a video off later today that has some interesting like animations and graphics that kind of make the scenario presented here even more easy to understand. But for now, here's the class presentation of it. Okay, so the case, Gettier case 1. And we will call it Smith and Jones job hunt. Okay, so in this example, we got a couple of characters, okay? So let me just kind of set up the scene for you. Once again, we're in a hypothetical scenario world, okay? Like that's philosophy. No one can get away from it. No one can change it. That's the way it is. So it's going to be a hypothetical scenario. And yeah, it's going to be unrealistic, but that's fine because we just want to explore the theoretical aspects of it. So here's Smith and Jones, and I'm telling you that they've applied for a certain job. So these are 2 people that are like competitors for a position at a company. They won't both get it. Only one will get it, and they're the finalists. So you know how sometimes you have to go through rounds of interview, and then it's down to you and another person, and the hiring committee or boss has to choose between these last 2 candidates. So that's Smith and Jones. They're the last 2. Now here's the thing. Smith, let me draw some pictures. That's Smith. That's Jones. Smith and Jones. Smith has a belief in his mind. So you see the title of the case. I can clear some space there. Smith, this is Smith, and he has a belief. So I'm putting a thought bubble so you can see it's a belief. He doesn't necessarily say it out loud, but he believes this. He thinks it's something true, and he has good reason to think this. Here's the belief. The belief is the other guy, Jones. So here's Smith, just so his name is clear. Here's Jones. Smith believes that Jones will get the job. I'll make this thought bubble a little bigger. Maybe I'll circle it afterwards so that I don't have to have an issue fitting it in. Jones will get the job. and, so there's like a conjunction here. It's an and statement. So the first part of the conjunction is Jones, the other guy will get the job. And second part, and Jones, the other guy, has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith believes this statement. Let's label this proposition here that he believes with a letter for bookkeeping purposes. So let's say that that's proposition D. So Smith believes this statement D, that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, why does he think that? Well, there's one more character to the story that I have to add, okay? And that's the boss that makes the hiring decision, who's conducted the 2 interviews with Mr. Smith and Jones. So here's the boss, big boss man. Okay, boss. See the boss? Stick figure. I made him with a bigger head. I don't know why. But anyway, that's the boss. Now, I'm going to tell you now part of the story. Why does Smith believe that Jones will get the job? And why does he think that Jones has 10 coins? Well, he's not just guessing. He has very good reasons for this. And here's the reasons. So after the 2 guys did the interviews are done, and they're just kind of waiting around in the lobby to see what the decision will be. Let's suppose that as the boss leaves the boardroom where these meetings were conducted, Jones temporarily has stepped out, maybe to use the bathroom or something, and therefore the boss has a private moment with Smith. And so Smith and the boss are just there, and the boss comes over to Smith and he kind of confides in him. He says, "Hey, Smith, I'm just telling you this. Stick around because it's not the official formal announcement. But I've kind of made up my mind, and I've decided I'm going to go with Jones. He's the more well-suited candidate. I've interviewed both of you, and you're great, but I'm going to go with Jones. I just think he's the better person for this position. So, but don't tell him, and just wait until I can come back and we can make this announcement, formal." So why does Smith believe that Jones will get the job? You heard the evidence, right? It's because the boss himself tells Smith that. He tells him, and Smith has no reason to doubt that the boss is telling the truth. The boss is the one that makes the decision. So what kind of better evidence could you have that it will be Jones? So that's why Smith believes Jones will get it, because the boss tells him. Now, the other part about Jones having 10 coins in his pocket, okay? There's no real easy way to just put it out there. So it's very simple. Smith, when Jones is in the room again, he says, "Hey, buddy Jones, I have a random question. Can you just give me an answer to this question? I know it's weird, but I just want to know, how many coins are over there in your pocket? You have coins in your pocket?" And Jones is like, "Yeah, actually, I think I do have some coins in my pocket." "Why do you want to know that?" He's like, "Don't worry, I just want to know. How many are there?" So Smith says, "You know what? I'm actually going to just take it upon myself. May I count those coins?" Weird thing to do, isn't it? But yeah, he does. So Smith counts the coins in Jones' pocket. Why? Because he wants to know how many there are, okay? So he does that. Here's what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which is one more, 10. Awesome. You have 10 coins. Thanks, buddy. I don't know. That's all. I just wanted to know. Curious. So now Smith counted the coins in Jones' pocket, and he counted that there were 10. So the physical act of counting provides him with extremely clear evidence that Jones does have 10 coins in the pocket. So he puts the 2 parts together, that Jones will get the job and that he has 10 coins in his pocket. And the whole backstory that I just gave you was just to explain how it is that Smith has discovered this belief D and why he has justification for it. So at the end of that part of our scenario, Smith has developed a justified belief in the statement labeled D, which does say that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, at this point, the story takes a little plot twist. And that's like a famous feature of all Gettier examples. In every Gettier case, and this is not just the only one, there's been in the literature, we've spawned thousands and thousands of different variations on these kind of cases. And in every single example, there's always this one weird element where some unexpected factor causes the justified belief to be true, but for a reason that is totally unrelated to the original justification itself. So there's always kind of this surprise ending to the Gettier case. And the surprise ending causes the relevant belief to be true, but not for the reason that the subject was basing the belief on. So here's what happens, okay? Boss comes back after some time with Smith and Jones waiting for him to return and give the announcement. He comes back into the lobby, and he's walking in, And he walks straight past Jones with his hand out like a handshake, and he goes straight over to Smith. And Smith looks a little surprised. But the boss looks at Smith and he says, "Hey, buddy, Smith, surprise. I'm just such a joker. I like playing games with people. You know, when I was saying earlier I was going to hire Jones, I was just saying that to see how you would react and kind of judge your reaction. But the whole time I made up my mind that actually you're the better candidate. And so I was never going to hire Jones. In fact, congratulations, Smith. You've been hired. You can start tomorrow. So you're the new employee." Smith, totally surprised, didn't think he'd get hired, right? But he did. Now, I told you one thing about this belief. Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, the closure principle is about to kick in. That closure principle that we talked about earlier. What did it say? The closure principle says that if you're justified in believing one statement and then you deduce a logically entailed statement from it, then you'd also be justified in believing the second statement that you deduced from the first. So Mr. Smith, once he had the belief in D, he used logic to simply deduce a very similar and similarly worded statement. That's what we would call E. What E says is this: the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, I just want you to consider the logical relationship between D and E there on the board. Can we agree that E is entailed by D? Like, in other words, supposing that D is true, E has to be true as well, because the only difference between the two statements is changing from the name of Jones to the generic statement, the man who gets the job. But if Jones gets the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, then it does imply that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket because that man would be Jones. So according to the closure principle, when Smith found this belief and was justified in believing it, since he then deduced E from it, and this is entailed by D, that means that he's now likewise justified in believing E. So let me take this story back a few steps to make sure that we're keeping track of all the little moving parts, okay? First step is there's the interviews. After the interviews, Smith is informed by the boss that he intends to hire Jones. And also separate from that, Smith counts the coins of Jones' pocket. He finds that there's 10 coins, and so that's the basis for the belief he forms in statement D, the statement again, that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, I may have stated a little prematurely the part about the boss coming back. That's still going to happen, but hold that off for a moment as we go through the steps of the scenario. So first, Smith forms the belief in D, and then on the basis of that belief, he deduces E. This little deduction move, I hope that's not throwing you too much. I know it's kind of strange, like why would someone make this deduction? It's not relevant as to why one would do it in real life. The only point is that logically speaking, E does follow as a statement that is entailed from D. So if Jones is the man that gets the job and has 10 coins, then that statement guarantees that the man that gets the job has 10 coins, namely Jones. So according to the closure principle, let me hear you say it in this chat. What's the status of proposition E that Mr. Smith deduces from D? Since he was originally justified in believing D, the entailed proposition, which he now believes also, is a statement that he has what to believe. What's the result of him deducing E from D, according to the closure principle? It just establishes that the second statement is also what? Go ahead and just try your best. Let me know what you think the point of the closure principle is as it bears on this little jump from D to E. Because that's one piece that we can't let go. No, not the word true, guys, no. If D is true, then E has to be true. That's what entailment means, correct. But the closure principle says that when a subject deduces a statement from an originally justified proposition, the second statement which they deduce is also justified. That's correct, Dimitri, yes. So he has great evidence to believe D. And that evidence just transfers over to E because E is a logical consequence of D. Just like I told you that you're justified in believing that I was born in the 80s because I said so. And therefore, if you figure out any statement that logically follows from that, the evidence that you have based on my testimony is going to also justify any of those related entailed statements. So in the end, Smith arrives at a justified belief in proposition E, okay? And at that point, the boss comes back and gives his news, his surprising news. So what was the boss's news, guys? Remind me of that element of the story. The boss comes back and he surprisingly says what to Smith? After having earlier claimed that he would hire Jones. In the end, what's the real deal? He says what to Smith? That Smith got the job. Surprise, Smith, it's you after all. Okay, now, at that point, Smith did get the job, but out of total coincidence now, okay, totally a coincidence because he's never counted the coins in his own pocket. He just randomly has a certain number in there. But as it turns out, and unknown to Mr. Smith, he also just so happens to have, what do you think, in his pocket? Smith. So this is like the plot twist. It makes proposition E true, but for a totally different reason than what Smith had thought. So it turns out, surprise, Smith gets the job, not Jones. And also, by coincidence, Smith, just like Jones does have as well, happens to possess what within his pocket? So what do you think is the surprise? What do you think is this little surprise last element? It turns out that Smith got the job, but it also turns out by sheer coincidence that he does have 10 coins in the pocket, correct? So tell me then about the status of proposition E at the end of our scenario. First question, did Mr. Smith believe E? Well, we already established that, yes, he believed E because he based it on the information that he used to form the belief in D. So Smith did believe that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, did he have justification to believe that? We've also covered that point. He's justified in believing E, and the reason he's justified in believing it is because it's a logical result from D, and he deduced it from D. So according to the closure principle, which seems to be well received and acknowledged, he's justified in believing E. Now here's the last question, is E true? As the story plays out, does E correspond to the facts? Is it true in the end that the man who gets the job has 10 coins in his pocket? Let me know, yes or no. Is E true at the end of the day, after all the events play out? You see the statement? Yes, it is true. Why is it true, though? Well, it's not true for the reason that Mr. Smith thought. Smith had judged this proposition to be true because he believed that Jones would get the job, and he knew that Jones had 10 coins in his pocket. But he did not think that he would get the job himself, Smith, nor did he have any idea that he had 10 coins in his pocket. So here's what Gettier thinks is the right explanation in the end. Proposition E is a justified true belief. It checks off all three of those boxes. But intuitively, common sense tells you that it's just not a case of what? It's a justified true belief, but it's not something that Mr. Smith actually, what's that word? Put that one in the chat one time. So in the end, Smith arrived at this justified true belief in E. But due to the weird mismatch between his evidence and the factors that make it true, correct, guys, he doesn't have knowledge of that statement. He got it right, but just due to total coincidence and luck. And what people think is that when you have knowledge, it's got to be something that isn't due to luck or randomness or just chance. It's got to be that you get the belief correct because of the evidence that you had that justified it. But in this case, though he has evidence that justifies his belief, it's true for a totally unrelated reason. And so it exposes this possibility, a case where someone can have a justified true belief, but still not have knowledge, because the factor that makes the belief true is completely unrelated to the factors that provided evidence, okay? Let me give you some other examples of Gettier cases too, because like I've said, there's many more than just the one. This is the original, so this is like the OG classic Gettier case number 1. But admittedly, it's very strange because there's some parts of it where you have to think about a person counting the coins in someone else's pocket and deducing a statement from another very closely worded statement for no apparent reason. So let me give you one that happened to me actually here at Chapman. So sometimes when, as an epistemologist myself, when Gettier cases happen in the real world, I like think about them so I can teach them later. And here's just such an example. Maybe something like this has happened to you. So suppose that you park your car in a parking lot, right? Or a big parking area where there's tons of cars parked. So somewhere maybe where you could forget exactly which stall you were parked in, or maybe which exact spot. So in my case, I drive like a black BMW car, and there's a lot of cars that sometimes look like that. So I parked in Chapman over across from Beckman Hall in the parking structure, and I was kind of in a rush to reach my classroom because I was arriving a moment late. So I quickly, dashed out of my car, get over to the classroom, made it on time, but I didn't have a lot of time to fully gather my surroundings and think about what I was doing. So as I was coming back later to, leave, I walk up into the parking structure and I was thinking this thought, where exactly did I park my car? I kind of didn't remember which aisle that it was in. So I walk over to one aisle on the floor that I remembered the car was parked. And I saw a black BMW where I thought I had parked. So my belief at that point in time was my car is in this aisle. Why did I believe that? What was my evidence? Because I saw a car that matched the description of my car parked in that aisle, and that's where I seem to have remembered parking. So at that point, I believed one thing. My car is parked in this aisle, and I think I had justification to believe that because the visual appearance made it appear as such. So I justifiably believed my car was parked in that aisle. Now, what do you think happened when I walked up and I got a closer look at the car which I thought was mine? It actually was a different, similar make and model. So I was confused and mistaken by the appearance of this other car that closely matched the appearance of mine. But just as I saw that, behind that car, 2 cars down in the same aisle, which I had not seen originally, there actually was which car? Can you follow this little scenario? So walked up, saw a different car, thought it was mine. Then I believed my car's in this aisle. Got closer to it, it wasn't mine. But then 2 cars over in that aisle, there actually was what? My car, exactly, Eric. So in the end, what was my belief? My car is in this aisle. Now, guys, was that true? It was true by stipulation of the case. My car was in that aisle, so it was a true belief. And was I justified in it? Also, I would say, yes, I had justification because I had that perceptual evidence. But look, here's the punchline. Would you say that based on that situation, I really knew that my car was in that aisle? No. I didn't have knowledge. I had a justified true belief, but it was only luck that made it true because the justification was based on a different car and not my own. So I was kind of lucky to have a justified true belief. And therefore, again, it wouldn't be really appropriate to say that I knew my car was in that aisle. I was basing it on evidence that was unrelated to the vision of my actual car. Here's another one that was given by Robert Nozick. It's discussed in our textbook in a different essay that I didn't assign to you. But I don't know if it's a realistic case. That one I just gave is pretty realistic. But how about this? Someone's on a lot of drugs, seeing all types of things, hallucinating all over the place. So in front of them in the room that they're in, they think they're seeing an elephant. So they believe there's an elephant in the room. Now, what they're looking at is a hallucination. It's just an illusion. It's something that's not real. But they believe it's real, so they think this. Now, suppose that in a different compartment of the room, behind a wall, which they cannot see through, there actually is, what do you think? A baby elephant in there sleeping, okay? So what's the belief this person had? There's an elephant in this room. Was it true? Actually, yes. Was it justified? I guess if we want to say that the appearance of the hallucinatory images was justifiable for believing that there was an elephant, then yes, it was justified true belief. But would you say this person seeing things really knows there's an elephant in that room? Probably not. And once again, we get a similar diagnosis. Why? Because the evidence that was used was based on the appearance of the hallucinatory images. And the fact that makes it true has nothing to do with those images, but the sight unseen of the actual elephant that's in another part of the room that's not being observed. So when you have a justified true belief, you don't always have knowledge. Isn't that strange? And that's what Gettier was able to show through these cases. Now, his original case is kind of weird, but it makes a point. And then it generalizes over to a lot of other examples too, where someone arrives at a true belief with reasonable evidence. But the evidence that they used is not at all relevant to the facts that make the proposition true. Now, what's the solution to this problem? Well, Gettier shows us that we need to add some criteria to the JTB definition. It's like justification, truth, belief, plus question mark, plus something that prevents you from getting a justified true belief through luck. But how to build this anti-luck, anti-Gettierization condition is the subject matter of deep debate and controversy in the field of epistemology. And so we're still now, to this day, spinning our wheels, looking for the right solution and the corrected definition of knowledge. I have my own view about it. I kind of do prefer the amended definition that Robert Nozick gives, but it's kind of weird. I mean, it basically is the idea that you have a true belief that's justified, but it also has to be such that it would remain true in a counterfactual scenario where we modify the factors a little bit. So like in the case of our hallucination guy, he has a true belief in this situation, but if the elephant wasn't there, it would be false, you see? So Nozick says it's only real knowledge when it's counterfactually sensitive to variation in the truth value of the proposition. So it's not just that you get it right in the actual world, but you would have gotten it right in a possible world if the truth value had changed. So you would be sensitive to the proposition being false. But of course, that analysis is quite complex. It requires discussion of what possible worlds are and how we could possibly set the bounds of what the close alternatives to the actual scenario are. But anyway, guys, that's it for Gettier for today. I had to push the discussion of René Descartes Meditation 1 and 2 to the Monday meeting, and that's what we'll cover on Monday. But that's not a problem because Monday and Wednesday were both originally designated for the work of Einstein. So if we only use one day for Einstein, I think that'll be fine as well. Okay, then, so I'm going to let you guys go. I know we're 1 minute over time. I'll send the video link to some interesting discussion of the Gettier stuff. It's very short, it's like 15 minutes, so you can watch it during a brief moment of time this weekend. And I'll be replying to all the email grade requests that I get, so you'll certainly know your grade on the midterm by the end of the weekend. Okay then, guys, so thanks again so much. Have a good one. Take care. And if you have any questions or anything else, let me know. I'll be sending off the link as well to the office hours that I hold in the next hour or two. That's certainly before 11:30, so you can check the campus announcements for that. Okay then, thanks again, and till next time, have a good weekend.